after has been told to give himself up. The indictment itself does not appear to be directly linked to the 2016 campaign. Instead, the two men are charged with a dozen counts accusing them of directing a campaign to lobby U.S. officials on behalf of the Ukrainian government and then hiding it from American authorities. Among the charges, that these two men were paid $75 million for their work and that they laundered at least some of the money to keep it hidden. The official reaction from the White House thus far, that it is not surprised the special counsel is actively performing its duties. Back with us, Matt Miller, former chief spokesman for the Justice Department and MSNBC justice and security analyst, and NBC News national security and justice reporter Julia Ainsley. Back with us along with my panel, Ari and Danny. Matt, we need to carefully point out that failure to make it known that you are working with a foreign agent is far, far, far from treason. Those are two different things.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Look, that's one of the most narrow charges in this indictment. It's something that the Justice Department usually handles administratively. If they see that someone is working as a likely foreign agent but hasn't registered, they'll send them a letter and give that person a chance to voluntarily register. But it is key to the rest of the charges here, because what it does is it shows the entire conspiracy. If you put it all together the way that Bob Mueller has done in this indictment, it shows that the fact that they didn't register is part of the concealment narrative. Right. They were concealing their registration because they wanted to conceal the money they made so they could avoid paying taxes on it. And that shows, that also goes to why they then laundered that money. So you have to look at that charge as one piece of the entire picture that they're painting in this indictment.
Julia?
That's absolutely true. I mean, when we first started hearing about FARA, it was right when Flynn was retroactively coming forward and then Manafort retroactively disclaiming what he had done. But what's important is that a lot of people I've spoken to in this space said that FARA was something that a lot of people took pretty loosely. You could file, you could not. There were a lot of kind of wishy-washy rules, and they didn't think that it was something that would really get them prosecuted on a federal level. It was, like Matt said, handled at an administrative level. But it is such a piece here, because if they're showing that, whether it be Manafort now or others down the road, we're taking money and not disclosing it from foreign governments. Well, if those foreign governments also attempted to influence our election, that goes well beyond just misreporting something on a form.
Well, and this goes to what we're learning as we digest this indictment right now in real time. Bob Mueller making a three-part case against Paul Manafort, that he lied about the money, and that is money laundering. That he lied about the lobbying, and that is hiding that he was working on behalf of this foreign power linked to Russia. And then he lied about the money he owed the U.S. government in taxes and conspiracy to defraud the United States.
So the oops, I forgot, oops, I forgot, oops, I forgot just doesn't fly when you're doing it on three separate levels.
Right. And so, as Matt Miller just referenced, if you only fail to register as a foreign agent of a foreign power, we know from past history that's not necessarily what gets you jail time. But this is, again, a three-part case of lying about three different interconnected things.
All right, let's bring in NBC News intelligence and national security reporter, who I promise wasn't trick-or-treating this weekend. He was working. Ken Delaney. And Ken, some people are going to say this has nothing to do with Russia. These are simply a couple of dirty business guys who didn't want to pay their taxes.
And who failed to disclose that they were lobbying for foreign power. That's right, Stephanie. But it does have to do with Russia, because Viktor Yanukovych, the politician on whose behalf these two men were doing this secret lobbying, is a Russian-backed, Putin-backed figure who now resides in Moscow. So there was a split within Ukrainian politics, and one side wanted to gravitate towards NATO and towards the United States, and the other side was pro-Russian. Manafort and Gates were with the pro-Russian guys.
Then how can the Trump administration possibly go back to the argument that they made several months ago when they had this meeting at Trump Tower that Jared was at, that Don Jr. was at, that, oops, we didn't know, we're new to this politics game, and we thought this Russian woman was here to talk about orphans. It was President Trump who dictated that was going to be the White House's statement. How, now that we know who Manafort is, who he was paid by year after year, how can that argument hold any water?
Well, they can't say that, Stephanie. And in point of fact, they couldn't say that before the election either, because there was a lot of reporting, including by NBC News, before the election about Paul Manafort's questionable ties to Russia. In fact, I was just looking at an old story that we published back in the summer of 2016, where prominent Republicans were saying that Manafort's ties were deeply disturbing. Because in addition to these ties to the Ukrainian politician, he also has a multi-million-dollar relationship with a Russian oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, that we and others have reported on extensively. So there's really no way for the White House or anybody associated with Donald Trump to say, I didn't know that Paul Manafort had ties to Russia.
Do we know if Oleg or any of these other Russians have been questioned by Mueller and his team?
We don't know that information. That's a great question.
All right, can we walk through for a moment who would have been involved in this indictment? Because if one wants to make the argument, and Danny, I ask you, this is simply Robert Mueller trying to go after him. This indictment isn't just Robert Mueller. You've got a grand jury. You've got 12 ordinary Americans who looked at this information and said, let's indict this guy. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, exactly. The government can proceed one of two ways. They can file what's called an information, but ultimately an indictment is a requirement in our Constitution that citizens sit in judgment and decide whether there's probable cause to proceed with these charges. In this case, it's likely that this indictment is as early in the investigation as it is because of a time limit problem. They were probably running up on the 5-year federal statute of limitations. So the strategy here may be to not only indict him, but send a message to other potential co-conspirators, potential colleagues, to come in out of the cold and make a deal. Because the federal government...
But it's not just Paul Mueller who has, Robert Mueller who signed this indictment.
Correct.
Right.
When you look at this indictment, the back page, 31 pages, you have Bob Mueller signing it. Robert Mueller, Special Counsel, Department of Justice. This is the first thing we've seen. This is the first paper we've seen out of this investigation, this office. And then this true bill blacked out part, redacted, is the anonymous foreperson of the juror, dated October 27th, as P. Williams was reporting. This began Friday. And this will remain blacked out, and everything that happens inside the grand jury box will, if this runs right, remain blacked out, because that is redacted. That is the black box. In this case, literally a black box. So we know Mueller, but everything has to go through the citizens. This is, if I can say so, something great about our constitutional system, because Robert Mueller is very powerful. You don't want to be on the wrong side of him, but even he has to go through.
Yes.
No, it's not. Even he has to go through these citizens, anonymous citizens, a jury of your peers, a grand jury picked from throughout the Washington area to vet these charges.
Can you believe how their lives have changed in the last 6 months? 12 ordinary citizens who happen to get a grand jury summons in the mail, and now this is what their life has become. Ken, what else are we missing here?
Well, the big question now, in my mind, Stephanie, is Paul Manafort going to flip? Is he going to cooperate? I mean, he's facing a mountain of very serious, well-documented charges. He is in the FBI building now, according to NBC News reporting, talking to FBI agents. You know, what does he know? Will he cooperate? I mean, you got to look at it. This scheme probably would have gone uninvestigated if Paul Manafort hadn't become Donald Trump's campaign chairman, right? I mean, this was going on for years. A lot of people knew about his work for these guys. Nobody was really looking. And then, you know, he becomes a prominent figure. Journalists start writing about it. Then the FBI gets interested. It's got to, I mean, he may be considering all these facts as he's trying to decide whether to say what he knows, if he knows anything about Donald Trump and Russia.
Julia, Danny mentioned it earlier. Tony Podesta, he's a name who's come up in the last week with his sort of ties. Walk me through it.
Well, we were reporting, I think it was 1 week ago today, that Tony Podesta was now at sort of an increased level of scrutiny.
And who's Tony Podesta?
Tony Podesta is John Podesta's brother. John Podesta was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. He has nothing to do with this. But Tony Podesta is a Democrat who has been leading one of the prominent left-leaning lobbying firms in D.C. for decades. And it was a real surprise to a lot of people he would be involved. But he worked with Manafort and Rick Gates to introduce Ukrainian officials to members of Congress during this campaign. And so the fact that he has not been named right now might show that he is someone to follow. He's certainly reading this indictment very carefully. He's also being looked at for failure to disclose on those FARA documents, just like Manafort did.
All right, last point.
Last point, you talk about the crime, you talk about the cover-up. This indictment on page 17 includes the words cover-up. It alleges to conceal this ongoing scheme we've been reporting. Manafort and Gates had a false, misleading, quote, cover story. Again, an important part of the